Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Christine, thanks for joining. And to start with, could you please introduce yourself, tell people about the great work that you do, and actually, I have to ask, where is that beautiful double rainbow?
Lovely, lovely question. First, the beautiful double rainbow was right outside my window. I'm fortunate enough to say that I look at a national park and some beautiful farmland, and we get rainbows a lot. So I feel like it's a lovely place to be.
Where is that? Where is that, Christine?
Oh, Virginia
Right.
in the Shenandoah Valley. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, a little slice of heaven, as they say. Um, yes, and so I am Christine Freeland, and the wonderful work I'm doing. I like to be saying who I am, and I am an explorer of different ways of being, and I've kind of evolved from more of a coaching focus that into someone who wants to support others in kind of in bringing them out in a community situation. I feel like community and belonging and being able to help them reach into their light and be able to shine and express that really for the good of the world. Because I think that's something that is really needed, is really helping people connect to their heart and their heart wisdom. And so any opportunity that I have to do that, whether it's at the grocery store or in a community online, and one of the projects that I don't want to call it a project, but I guess it um, is is working on a heart-to-heart online community, which also is something I love, which is working with other people that are connected with their hearts and hearts and minds. And we're getting ready to open up some spaces where people um, can connect to their hearts and be able to share themselves in a safe environment. And then to grow and learn along with us, because none of us has all the answers, and we learn from each other.
Yeah.
And so that's my focus right now. And they say when you're really aligned with your heart, I feel that tingling in the back of my head when I say this, because it's so true and real for me that connecting with others in this way is what we need in this world. So
Right. And I'm with you 100%. And when we created the Values Jam card game, part of it was to allow a safe space to be created for people. And it struck, so Lisa Birtles was the other co-founder of this card game. And it struck us that normally when you're having a conversation, kind of both people have got an agenda and an end game to get to,
yeah.
and you're not really listening to the other person. You're trying to get your point across. And we were like, how can we actually relieve the pressure in a conversation? So that's why we've got the guiding questions on the back of the card so that neither of the participants needs to feel that pressure. And
Mhm.
actually, the question is not loaded because it's not from the other person, it's actually from the back of the card deck. So
Right.
that seems to invite people to be a lot more open and sharing than they might otherwise be. But we'll see. We'll see how we go with that. So how can people get a hold of you, Christine?
I have a pretty good presence on LinkedIn. And that is what I would recommend. I have a website, but I've recently realized that was more focused on coaching and organizational leadership, and I think I have moved away from that. So I'll just point people to LinkedIn, and Sirius Leadership is what it's called. Sirius, leadership. And there's a whole story behind that, which I won't go into, but there's more to us than we know. And that's kind of why I picked that name. It's a star and it's a constellation in the heavens.
Okay. So let's choose a card deck. And before we started to record, you showed me that you have a ValuesJam card deck.
Yes.
So is it shuffled? Is the card deck shuffled?
No, I will shuffle it right now.
Okay,
Hopefully.
so let's do first. And then when you've given it a good mix up, could you please make 3 piles in front of you? They don't have to be even sizes, but just 3 piles.
Okay. All right, 3 piles. Oops. Yeah.
And so are the values words pointing up, or are they face down?
Yes.
They're pointing up. Okay.
Okay. Is that okay?
That's fine. So
Okay.
without taking any notice of the top card, because that's not the one we're going to be choosing, are you going to choose the left pile, the right pile, or the middle pile?
The middle pile.
Okay, so could you pick up the middle pile and then go to card 7, please? And that's the card we'll play with, if you agree.
Okay.
So what have you got?
I have excellence. The card excellence.
Okay. And what was that reaction about, Christine?
Well, first I was thinking, because I was looking at some of my other ones, like courage and things that are really alive for me. And excellence, I tend to have maybe some underlying ways that I was taught. Probably I worked in a very bureaucratic organization that was focused on excellence and very high pressure and very really the way it was defined was more like I'm doing great over everybody else. So that is, I think, why I made a face, but then at the same time, I just realized, as we had talked about earlier, that there's another side to that. So
Okay, so make a choice then, please. So you mentioned courage as something that is really something that plays to you. So we can either go with courage or we can go with excellence. So where are you at?
I think I'm going to go with courage.
Okay, let's do that then. So the first question is, what does courage mean? And what does it look like, sound like, feel like?
Those are good questions. Courage to me means having the willpower and the strength to look within. And again, being heart-centered is so important, and having the courage to go there and see who you could be. So it's very, because people, when you say heart center, and people say, oh, that's mushy, you're just talking about love. And it's way more than that. And all of the different religions and spiritualities ultimately point to the heart as the seat of wisdom, the right kind of wisdom that we need right now. And really that we always need. But it takes courage to access that and then to live your life through that and to understand the intuition and messages that you get from that. And it can be fierce. It can be fierce love.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And actually, it's a whole different kind of feeling than from the head, right? The
Oh,
head, you can understand it. It's easier to explain. It's probably not as emotionally engaging. And so, in that respect, it's a lot easier to handle and deal with.
mhm.
Whereas the heart, you get into all of that unquantifiable stuff that you can't really explain. You just know that it's so powerful. But, how are you going to explain that to somebody else? And the thing that really fascinates me about the word courage is that the French for heart is cœur. And so courage, that kind of association strikes me as really weird. And just connected to that, um, the word encouragement, I find that fascinating in terms of the relationship between encouragement and courage, because what you're doing is giving people courage through your encouragement. And yet I don't think people think of it as being associated with courage.
Mm.
Uh, so there are just some thoughts to play back to you initially. So either give me some thoughts on what you just heard, or we can move on to the metaphor part of the question, which is, when you think of the word courage, what images come to mind, what sounds come to mind, what feelings come to mind?
Okay, I think I'll go back to kind of what you were saying about the mind and the brain, and how it's easier to make decisions and work from up here, um, instead of letting your heart. And yes, it comes with your minds and emotion. And again, that's where courage comes from, because if you ever ask somebody, how do you feel, or how can you express this from your heart, they will freeze and freak out on you because they are not used to that. And it's not accepted in a lot of organizations and businesses, because they see it as weak, when in reality, it's an incredibly strong place to come from.
Mm,
And so letting the heart inform your mind on how to be is extremely powerful.
mm. You reminded me of there was a terrible incident. It's probably more than a year ago now. I can't quite remember exactly when, but there was a guy in London who basically had a machete and started to attack people. And a guy confronted him and stopped the whole incident being worse than it already was. And when he was interviewed, um, he explained that he was just passing by and he witnessed what was going on. And somebody said something like, well, obviously you were very brave. How did you make that decision? And he said, I had no choice.
Yeah.
So it was this thing about what you were saying about he didn't process that in his head at all. He just did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, operating from, I would say, probably his gut and his heart, because we have all these intelligences that are more than just the brain, that we're learning about, with science and medical research is, and yeah, allowing, yeah, that's a great story, because a lot of times we override our hearts and our guts, with the over busy mind. Um, and it's usually self-preservation, um, acting out of fear. And when you don't give yourself time so when you do override that, you're not really giving yourself time. Like, this individual is like, I'm reacting, I mean, or responding, however you want to say, but I'm not thinking, I'm just going to be the person that needs to help somebody. So
Yeah, so I'm just thinking while you were talking there, I was thinking about that situation, and like you say, sometimes your mind overrides your heart, and in some cases that might be a very sensible thing to do, because in this case, whether he realized it or not, he was putting his life at risk, and so was it the right choice? I don't know.
Oh, that's a great question. Right or wrong, all depends on your perception. And yeah, yeah, I think that many things that are right, that seem right, if you take maybe the long-term look, end up not being right, or the way I look at it, affirming to life, life affirming, or things that we thought were wrong down the road end up being right. And I know people have had this experience, where they thought this thing that happened to them was the worst thing that could have ever happened. And down the road, they go, oh my God, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. You know what I mean? So yeah, our definitions between right and wrong, in some ways, I'd like to get rid of those words, because is it coming from your heart? Then it's right. And then I use the word, but I don't have another word to use. If you see what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I do, and also just the use of right and wrong, it can
Mhm.
only be founded on what we know.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much we don't know. So
Oh,
is it even appropriate to be using right and wrong?
I
Um,
completely agree. Go ahead.
and actually that's something about courage, isn't it something about the willingness to put yourself into a situation where you're not comfortable, you don't know. So that guy, he didn't know what was going to happen. Um, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but you see these guys jumping off a cliff into the water.
Uh-huh.
I think of that as a display of courage. I don't know, maybe it's not, um, but it's maybe they know that it's deep enough and all of that sort of thing, and that they're going to be okay. But it still feels like it's a display of courage to actually jump into this depth of water from a great height. Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a funny one that you bring up, because my career was in the National Park Service, and we had some parks out west where they call it base jumping.
Yeah, that's it.
And
That's
yeah, and that's in the parks it's illegal. But people do it anyway. Um, and that's a really interesting question. Is it courage? It definitely is courage to take that step, because there's no guarantees. That's what I learned at all. In fact, we had people that died doing it. So,
wow.
um, yeah. So it does take courage, because it's a life or death thing. That I would ask, are they valuing their life when they do that? I don't know. I don't know the answer. And is it something that they're doing to get that, to feel alive?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Because they don't. So
yeah.
that is really interesting you bring that up.
Well, I can't relate to base jumping because I've never done it.
Mhm.
But even if you think about theme park rides,
Mhm.
that are exhilarating,
Yes.
some people's perspective might be, well, you're brave or you're displaying courage by going on one of these rides.
Mhm.
Uh, I I don't think of it like that though, because if I go on, and I'm not a big fan of these rides. I can do them, um,
Mhm.
but actually, my mentality is, I'm sure this has been safety checked, and
Yeah.
I'm going to be okay.
Yep.
So I trust. It's more about trust actually.
Mhm.
than courage. And so I'm willing to give it a go and see how it feels. And yes, it gives you a rush. But then other people would be, oh, it's so brave to do that. So it's
Yeah,
very perspective driven, isn't it?
it really is. I think most of life is perspective driven. And I think a lot of people nowadays are trying to maybe look at their perspectives. I just see more and more people doing that, saying, questioning. And that takes courage, or going back to courage. Questioning your beliefs and your perceptions is
Mm.
what I've been taught or just learned from watching, observing others. Is that something that is needed in my life anymore? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And I think right now there's a bit of discomfort in a lot of different generations, especially in kids, because they're coming out questioning, right? And not sure where they belong in this world and society and with all the challenges that we have. And so they're faced up front with having to develop the courage to figure that out. I don't know why I went down that path, but questioning, I think, is the healthiest thing that we can all do right now.
When you were talking, I was just the word curiosity came into my mind as being so valuable.
Yes.
And you're not sure why you went down the youth route, but it's close to my heart at the moment because I'm involved with a project which is about giving youth a voice.
Mm,
And it
right.
came about because an education charity that I'm connected with had invited young people to send in artwork.
Mm,
And I'm involved in a startup which offers virtual exhibitions of art. So I thought, oh, I wonder if there's something that we could do in this space. So I started to do research, and there's two statistics. I see if you're already familiar with this. So the first one is that of the 8 billion people on the planet, 2 billion are under 14 years old.
wow.
Yeah,
Mm,
so 25% of our population. Now, of course, those that community don't vote, and they're not asked what they want. They're given what grown-ups think they should have. So they don't have a voice, right?
yes.
Then if we go up a bit, 50% of the world's population are under 30 years old.
Mm,
And that compares with just 1.6% of government leaders being under 30 years old, which might be understandable because you
mhm,
have to have a certain level of experience to get to that sort of position. But
right.
what it doesn't do is get away from the total disconnect between the age of the people running the show versus the people that are on the receiving end of it, and 50% of our population. Um, and the other thing that comes to mind here is how youth is somehow a really precious stage of life, um, and able to provide a much purer kind of perspective, and often more logical one compared to us older people that have been kind of tarnished with the years.
Oh yeah. They I love that the project that you're doing because creativity is absolutely pivotal. And connecting these young kids, um, letting them shine with their gifts. And I think it's really interesting. I didn't know those population or those statistics. And I think that this is my gut feeling that kids are going to see how it's not supposed to be done. And I think they are. And it is my hope that they will be questioning the perceptions and values of some of the leaders, which again I see happening more and more, so that sometimes you have to see what doesn't work and how it's done in order to come up with your own ideas and solutions.
Yeah, I agree. And there's also something about they're able to kind of get rid of all of the interference sometimes and see things very simply and clearly. And if I'm going to say something really controversial now, so I hope people that are watching this aren't offended. But
Mhm.
if you were a corporate organization and you hired a headhunter firm to find your new CEO,
Mhm.
and they presented you with two candidates that match the profile of the two candidates for the presidency, I think you might question whether they had done a very good job or not.
Yeah.
And like I say, that maybe that's a bit controversial, but
I don't think so at all. I can't imagine having a good leader from somebody called a headhunter group, because that is old paradigm leadership, and we don't need that anymore. To be blunt, we need the new leaders and the people that and the younger people that have more of an open mind when they're, and it's so complicated in some ways. But you're right, they have they're the key, really. Because a lot of people like me at my age, and I've retired from a very bureaucratic organization. And at the very end, I learned how dysfunctional it was the last 5 years through some very eye-opening experiences and training that changed my perception to look at it differently. Because I was raised at, you work hard, you do your job, and you don't say anything. And you get your paycheck, and then you're done. And what I started to witness, I always witnessed it, and I knew it never felt right. But then I learned that there's so many other ways that you can work with people. So I'm not working for someone, I'm working with them. And a lot of the leadership we have doesn't know how to do that. And they don't know how to lead from their heart wisdom. And kids, so I'm going to switch back over to younger people. Before they're taught how to not do that, so they're taught over, ever since they're kids to not be that way. But before they're not taught that, they have infinite knowledge and wisdom and connections, and they know it's right when they're allowed to connect to this. And so many parents say, oh, from the mouths of babes, and because they haven't been brainwashed into a certain role based on society, organizations, education systems that we have now. And there's a lot more recognition of that, I think.
And then for that generation, let's just call it youth or young people, just to keep it general. What's your perspective of how much courage they actually will need? Because in that situation where I mentioned the two candidates for the presidency, it's not so much the individuals, it's more the system that creates the shortlist of those two individuals. So how does youth or young people set about making something different and better there?
That's a great question. There's a lot of energy going towards keeping the status quo.
Yeah.
And it definitely takes courage to create something new, because I really don't believe you're going to change. And I might be totally wrong about this, but I've kind of come to the conclusion personally that changing other people is maybe a waste of time. Trying to change other people, I should say. They can change themselves, through being curious and through learning what speaks to them. But you can't change others. You can, but what you can do, because then I'm trying to change it based on my perceptions of what you should be. That's very ego driven. I'm kind of meandering all over the place here, but it's a good point. I lost my train of thought a little bit. What were we? What was the last thing you said?
So we were thinking about young people effecting change. What level of courage and other skills would be needed to change the status quo when there's so much energy in maintaining the status quo?
Yes. And I think there's a lot of value with grassroots groups of younger people. So you have to create something new that works better than what exists now. And then people will see that and say, oh, yeah. There's a bunch of people I know I'm following right now. Richard Flyer, I think his name is. And he's worked in organizations and communities at creating what he calls a parallel society. So I'm very interested in what he says, because he's part of what he's saying is the whole spirit, our spirit has to be involved in this. We can't try to do this from up here, and recognize that each one of us are creative beings, whatever you want to call it. And this is used to create these grassroots, and you take different sections. So let's say if I was an organization, I would take the different divisions, which is another great name for something. Let's divide, and bring everyone together and find out who has what skills, what interests, what specific contribution they have to make, and create something new. Create a community is basically what he's saying. And allowing each person to thrive and contribute to the way they see best. And whatever comes out of that is going to be good. I don't know if maybe that's pie in the sky, but I'm very curious about that. And kids, yes, coming around again they will need courage to follow what they feel is right. And because there's always going to be somebody that's going to tell them it's not going to work, or it's a stupid idea, or based on my experience, we tried this and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So that definitely takes courage.
Mm. The other thing so you're talking about, did you say Richard Flyer?
Yes.
Okay. So this piece about us needing to be engaged at an emotional level reminded me of so the COP series of meetings, because it seems that whenever I hear anybody making an announcement, it's always really kind of official and dry
Yeah.
and lacking in heart and emotion. And yet the reason that it was started, presumably, was because somebody cared a lot about this and felt that it was worthy of attention at that highest level.
Mhm.
And yet it seems to have been, all of the energy seems to have been sapped out of it, and it's reduced to a process of meetings and production of documentation and decisions, which just doesn't feel right. So when I was listening, I was thinking, what would the COP series of meetings look like if it was full of heart-centered people and energy? Uh,
Mm,
what would that look like?
mm. It would be amazing. I know it would. um, yeah, and that's what's lacking. Um, and it's not easy. And you have to, here's the big one, you have to let go of control.
Yeah,
Because that's where most of these organizations really lose. They start down some of these roads and then somebody's saying, but you're not controlling them, or something happens that is controversial, which is going to happen anyway, whether you think you're in control or not, because guess what? You're not really in control. This is an illusion, but it's a way to have power over other people. And we don't need that anymore. We really need community at every level, business, organization, it doesn't matter. Small towns. And then I'm kind of pulling out, have a little bit of regenerative leadership training, experiencing, I don't know what you want to call it. But I love the idea of taking these small towns and building a heart-centered community. And then they connect to this town over here that's building a heart-centered community, and see how we can support one another. And so kind of fractally, these things grow and we connect, but nobody's in charge. And it works. And they've proven this Guy Richard Flyer, I cannot remember this town. I think it's in Sri Lanka, where they did this. They created a community, they uplifted everyone, and they are growing that. And it can be done. It's a lot of work and a lot of heart. And I'd sure rather spend my time doing that than following somebody's orders from above that really has no idea what's going on.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking back to when I was in corporate leadership roles, and my approach was always to create a compelling vision that you could get people to understand and buy into and want to be part of, and then give them the freedom to do whatever they could do towards that. And
Right.
it was it was not wholly a heart-centered approach, actually, because the head told me
Mhm.
that, let's say I'm the leader in an organization and there were a few thousand employees. Well, what's more important? Is it more important for me to operate at a high level and them not, or the other way around? And it's just a numbers game, right? So if you can get 5,000 people doing a fantastic job, in a way, it doesn't really matter what the leader does. Uh,
Right.
so it always struck me as, why do you concentrate on the performance of the supposedly top person when actually it's the combined performance of everybody else that really makes the difference?
Yes. Have you heard of Portzorg? I'm going to pronounce it wrong. And I think it's in the Netherlands, I believe. And they have turned elder care on its head, basically, because I don't know how it is in the UK, but the way we treat our elders, we basically don't. We don't treat them very well. And the same was happening there. And the nurses came together with the person that owned it, and I'm again not remembering his name, but and so they said this isn't working for us. So what they developed was the nurses, the ones that were providing the care, because they were like, you have 5 minutes to do this when you're with somebody, 5 minutes, very much like the medical systems. And they came up with the solutions. The group of nurses were the ones that knew what needed. And it was basically creating community for these people and listening, and the things by supporting them that way, they needed a lot less care, medically, because they felt like people cared about them, and that means everything. And they were supported, and this is growing to other countries. So there's so much that we could do.
Yeah, and I think there's two things that come to mind on that. One is that as long as the people that are directly engaged with the customer, if you want to think of it as like that, as long as they're capable, then they are the very best people to make choices and decisions about what needs to be done there, because they are there.
Right.
And then the second thing is that the world is moving a lot faster than it used to now. So maybe it used to be that command and control had time to make the choices and decisions that were good enough. And it didn't matter so much that the decision making was far from the point of service delivery. Whereas now, I think that's no longer the case, and is more supportive of those people at the sharp end being not just trusted, but equipped and trusted, I guess.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes. Go ahead.
Just
No,
one
no.
final thought, actually,
Yeah.
and that is about I still think back to those leadership roles, and it did take courage, because like you were saying, sometimes things will go wrong.
Yeah.
But like you also said, they'll go wrong anyway, sometimes. So it's just a question of having that courage, trusting in the unknown and trusting in people to make the right choices most of the time, with the right intention, as long as you give them everything that they need to be able to do that. Sorry, thank you for letting me finish off on that point.
No, I love that. I just love that. Yeah, we have to it would be allowing them to succeed instead of telling them to succeed. And I have to question this. You just reminded me when you were talking about older leadership, and there are two things, boy, having the time. So one of the things we don't have, or we haven't, the habit that we have fallen into is having to constantly be busy. And that is incredibly damaging for us, for wherever we're working, and for the environment, because we are not taking care of ourselves, and we're not slowing down to get that perception that we need on what really needs to be done, not what someone's telling me needs to be done. And what needs to be done, say, in my local community is going to be completely different than whatever somebody in another area needs to be done. That's why there's no like one solution thinking that a lot of leaders have. And I even question the paradigm of leadership in the past being beneficial. And I can go maybe thousands of years back, but I won't. I'm going to go to the world wars that we had. And this is where a lot of our command and control, I believe, experiences came from. So a war created the systems that we have now to, lead and manage people and be in control. So what have we created from that? I think if we create from a different place, heart wisdom and the connections we have with one another, which when are allowed are very powerful, and create things that are more life affirming than what is created from world wars. I mean, anyway, that's an opinion for sure that people won't agree with, but it just occurred to me the other day about that.
Maybe if people don't agree with that or react against it in some way, maybe another not dissimilar metaphor is that of a factory and a production line.
Yes.
Where you treat your assets in a way that there will be benefit created for the organization or the factory. And if you set about running your organization like that, then you might end up with command and control very similar to what you described is generated by a wartime situation. But what both of them have in common is that they're not actually taking into consideration the health and well-being and sustainability of the various stakeholders. It's kind of bleeding everything for the benefit of the organization or maybe the people that are involved in the war, if you want to stretch it to that. So I'm conscious of time. Oh my goodness! How did that time go so quickly? How did that? So I don't know if you're already aware, but we always wrap up a values jam in the same way, and it's with a final question, which is, what are you encouraged to do differently about courage as a result of our conversation?
I am encouraged to connect more, and this was in the back of my head, but now it's up here. That the younger people in society need support to be able to have this, to be courageous and to grow into, creating something new that will benefit everyone. And I think that is very important for the benefit.
So what might you be encouraged to do about that, Christine?
Connect, because I'm right now not connected. I know plenty of people that find it very important to shine the light and lift up younger generation. And I want to make sure to include them in the communities that I'm involved in.
Great. Okay. And mine, I'm going to look up Richard Flyer because that sounds fascinating to me. So I Google the right thing. It's Richard Flyer and Parallel Society. Is that right?
Yes. I think there's also symbiotic culture, I believe, is what he talks about. I think he's got a book coming out about that.
Okay, so I'll be sure to educate myself on that.
I'll be curious what you think. Curious.
Thank you so much for joining for this Values Jam. And I'm really pleased that you made the choice to go with courage. It's been a fascinating meander through various topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. And I'd love to meander, so this was perfect.